cymbals? Well, it's something anyway. But the main point is, what kind of a song was it? See, now this is the first army song in the Bible. You think of any great army songs we have today in the Christian church. Onward, Christian soldiers, marching us to war. Those are the exact words. The tune goes something like that, see? Onward, Christian soldiers. How many of you know that? You know that? See, that's the kind of song that Miriam and the children of Israel sang. It was a victorious song. It's a victorious song. That's my favorite of these. I like another one that says, the Son of God goes forth to war, a mighty crown to claim, to gain, who follows in his train. I like that one. I don't like that one that says, you may walk with the infantry, shoot the artillery. How many of you know that? Do you know that one? I'll tell you why I don't like that. Because I don't think the motions help you to get the message of that song. I'm in the Lord's army. And a lot of those kids who are singing that aren't saved. And yet we just, they like motions. Yeah, I used to work with children so much that I reached the time when really I could hardly sing a song without making motions. Wasn't quite that bad, but almost. And I believe it's good for motions if they really help to put across songs. But to me, I'm so busy trying to march with the infantry and shoot with the artillery and all that I don't even know what the song's talking about. But I love these others. All right, victorious song. So, you see what I put on that? Can you read it where you are? Double F. Y'all know, what does double F on the musical scale mean? How many of you know? Let this old musician teach you that. I tell you, that just thrills my soul that I can teach music to anybody. It's the Latin fortissimo, which means very loudly, very bravely. Fortis means brave, but it's very loudly. Sing it in loud tones. See, that's the way they sang. There are some songs that shouldn't be sung in loud tones. They ought to be sung in very quiet tones. But there are other songs that shouldn't be sung in quiet tones. They ought to be sung in loud tones. And that's one of them. Exodus 15, the mighty victory of God. And did you notice this? What did they give thanks for? They gave thanks for the fact that Pharaoh's army was drowned in the Red Sea. Now, a lot of folks today who think they're sweet, cute Christians. Oh, by the way, I'll have to go a little longer. But I'll chop it off the next period. And say, oh, no, you shouldn't rejoice. Well, now, I'm going to tell you, if Saddam Hussein repents, I'll rejoice. But if he doesn't repent, and if he's killed, my conscience won't hurt me a bit in rejoicing. Not a bit. Pharaoh's army is drowned in the Red Sea because they're trying to defeat God's plan. Okay, folks, I didn't mean to keep you over the 10 minutes, but I'll cut that short to the next period. Take our break now. Now, when we closed, I was in the act of showing you my diagram. The first 12 chapters of Exodus are the story of redemption by blood and by power. And then the last 28 chapters are the results of redemption. First result, guidance by the God of glory in a path of glory. And I look out on this class, just if we get God's will for us, I want to tell you, glorious things are in the future for all of us here. Because God doesn't know how to lead any other place than a place of glory. Because He's the God of glory. Then, victorious song. Then the third is the air coming down from heaven. That's the manna. supernatural supply of the needs. I don't know how many of you have real special financial needs right now. You know, one of the greatest thrills that a girl or boy in a family or a young person in a family can have is the thrill of seeing God answer prayer and supply material needs, financial needs. Things like that just never wear off as far as children and young people are concerned. Do you know why they call this white hoarfrost that came down from heaven manna? See, the Hebrew, manhu, is manna. They came out and said, manhu, what is it? That's what manna means, what is it? See, so they called it, what is it? But what was it? It was food from God in heaven. And then the Bible takes that manna as a great picture of Christ, who came down from heaven for us as God's manna. That's the third thing, God's supernatural supply of needs. Some of you right now, young and old, may have just special material needs. You keep coming to God and remember, be sure you're saved. And if you're saved, you can claim the fact that God redeemed you is His guarantee to supply your needs. Then the fourth is just the V for victory. We had this a lot during the war. The Salvation Army had these little buttons for the lapel, little pins for the lapel. Victory through Christ. V through Christ. I know I gave away a great many of those in the public schools. And you know, Winston Churchill, the great leader of Great Britain, was known by this sign everywhere he'd go. In very dark days, he'd just hold up the index finger and the middle finger, giving the V for victory sign. Well, you say, how can I have victory? The fact you're redeemed. The fact I'm redeemed is God's guarantee to give me victory. God's guarantee to give you victory. And then the fifth is the two tables of the law. Obedience, chapters 20 to 24, the law. And we're going to spend a lot of time in studying the meaning of God's law, the meaning of the Ten Commandments. I heard a person say one time, now I've kept the Ten Commandments all my life. He said, now there are some other things I haven't done, but I've kept the commandments all my life. Well, if you keep the commandments, that includes everything else. Those commandments just include everything. And we're going to see when we study how all-inclusive they are. I think Pastor Wood has studied these some with you in the past, and I hope that I'll be able to give some additional light on them. And then the triangle is for the tabernacle. That's as close as I can come drawing the tabernacle. I have in my notebook some very good diagrams of the tabernacle, and they have no copyright on them. And I have a good copy machine at home. So when we come to study the tabernacle at the end of Exodus, I'll give each one of you at least one of these copies of the tabernacle building. It's one of the greatest ways to preach the gospel of Christ, because it's just filled with Jesus all the way through. So this sixth result of redemption is worship. And oh, how we need that. I spoke at another Christian day school this morning. He's waving me over here. I say, I got away in order to get this. By the way, did you pick it up at the end of the period? I was way over there, but when the thing ended, I never know where I'm going to be at any given point, in the class. So good. Thanks for waving at me, and the same to you. What was I saying? I don't remember. Yeah, and they try to lay great stress over there on worship. And there are different ways to emphasize it. On the child's level, on the teenager's level, and so forth. But that's one thing God has for us in the tabernacle. How to worship God. Some folks have the idea you can just worship in any old way. You worship your way and I worship mine. There's only one way to worship, and that's God's way. And the tabernacle is just filled with that. God's way of worshiping God. God's way of worshiping God. All right, redemption. The story of redemption, chapters 1 to 12. by blood and by power, and then the results of redemption. 6 great results of redemption in the last 28 chapters of the book. On page 45, let's see. I think 46 would be a little bit better place to stop today. Would that be going too much ahead of y'all? Some of you haven't started anyway, huh? How many of you got through the assignment in some way? Good. That's good. You compare very favorably with college students, believe me.
You looked at the wrong group, Mr. Sarah. Should have been looking at this group over here.
Yes. How about the group over here? May I check? Oh, I'm not sure they're telling the truth. But okay. All right. Let's take page 46, and then we'll pick up 45 next time. The story of redemption in chapters 1 to 12. First, the need of redemption. You see, when you study salvation, you have to begin with the need. If I don't have any sense of need, you can talk to me about the fact that God's provided salvation, and it'll all go in one ear and out the other. Start with need. When we were in Genesis, we took the fact that the first 11 chapters of Genesis are designed to give the need of redemption in the human family, the human race as a whole. All right, now you come in a more explicit way in the book of redemption. And you begin with the need of redemption. What did God accomplish through this terrible oppression? In connection with your answer, use the general lines of reasoning. Back during World War II, I was up north one January. I preached up in New England for 4 straight Januaries. And I went to a second-hand bookstore where they also had first-hand books. And one of them was a book telling about Hitler and the persecutions under Hitler. And you know, I was standing up as I read that, and really I thought I was going to faint. I had to sit down when I read those horrible things that the Nazis did. Well, the other day I was just reading a little more in detail about what the Egyptians did to the Hebrews. And I had that same general kind of feeling as if I was going to faint. Awful things. God let them pass through one of the worst depressions that any nation has ever passed through at the beginning of their history. What did God accomplish through it? Let me mention 3 things that God accomplished through this. The first is that He purified them. Suffering is used of God to purify. In this connection, I like to quote Lamentations 3:27. Lamentations 3:27 is talking about the destruction of Jerusalem under Nebuchadnezzar. And boy, I mean, it's vivid. Never Jeremiah said when he walked around Jerusalem that he saw an old white-haired man, and right alongside that old white-haired man who was dead was a little baby that was dead. And then he just went into detail about the awful things. And you say, that was an awful thing, wasn't it? Yeah. But Lamentations 3:27 says, it is good for a man to bear the yoke in his youth. Good for a man to bear the yoke in his youth. That's very different from what we hear today. You know, people say, well, that boy isn't any good because his mother wasn't any good. Because his father wasn't any good and they weren't good to him. You know, and that's why he goes into all these things. No, it's good for a man to bear the yoke of his youth. Now, it's certainly right that we're to sympathize with those who have it rough. Sometimes people say, if you haven't had it rough, you just can't really sympathize with those who have it rough. I'm not sure of that at all. I didn't have it rough. I was brought up sort of with a silver spoon in my mouth. But the fact that I was really helps me to feel for those who don't have it like I had it. And who really have it rough. But don't you feel sorry for yourself. It's one thing to sympathize. We should sympathize, but not feel sorry. And you take, let me say just a word to our dear colored students. Oh, I'm so glad that you, do you want me to, usually I don't like to call you. But if I do call you to speak to you in a special way, would you rather be called blacks or would you rather be called colored? How many of you, would you vote on this for me? I want to know. We had a discussion the other day. How many would rather be called blacks? How many would be called colored? Well, you would rather not be called. I don't blame you. I know what you mean. I know exactly what you mean. But I do want to be able to distinguish. We're talking about the awful slavery of the past, and believe me, it was terrible. In 1619, see, that was 1 year before our Pilgrim forefathers landed in this country, 1620. We bought the black people from Africa over here slaves, and they have a great past. But remember this, if you're a Christian, trust in Jesus, you are not at the mercy of past slavery. You can trust Jesus, and trust Jesus only. You know, the one who spoke is one of the blacks and one of the dearest friends of my wife and me. She and her dear mother and husband ministered to my wife. Just a year ago, my wife was still with me. And I just told them today, I said, a year ago, we were still going together there. And what a blessing they've been. But you're not at the mercy of that. And a lot of people are just saying, you can't expect anything from the blacks today because of slavery. Yes, you can, because of Jesus. Which is stronger, slavery or Jesus? See, Jesus is far stronger than slavery. It's good for a man to bear the yoke in his youth. Now, slavery is wrong. It's a sin for a man to own another. It's a sin, that's wrong. But where sin abounded, grace did much more abound. And by the time it reaches you as a Christian, it's God's will for you. And past slavery, God can use to make you a better Christian. And what's true of our dear friends is, father may not be a Christian, your father may get drunk, come home drunk. You're not at the mercy of that. You aren't at the mercy of that. And God can use that as a part of your bearing the yoke in your youth to make you a better Christian. All right, that's the first thing. God purified his people through this awful suffering. It is good for a man to bear the yoke in his youth. Evidently, when the children of Israel were in Egypt, the mortality rate was very low. See, the Bible says that the children of Israel kept increasing. The mortality rate, the death rate was very low. The birth rate was very high. And the health rate was almost perfect. There's a verse in Psalms that tells us about the health rate. Psalm 105:37. Not one feeble person among the tribes. What about that? Not one feeble person among the tribes. Health rate. Supernatural from God. And so, in the worst kind of things, you can just expect an unusual demonstration of God's power. If any of you are having it unusually rough right now, just take that. You can expect an unusual demonstration of God's power in answer to that. Then the second benefit was that this suffering united God's people. Mutual suffering unites people. You know, oftentimes a church prays for more unity. You have a good deal of bickering and backbiting in the church and pray for more unity. But you know, generally it's a costly thing to pray for unity. Because one of the main ways God unites is by letting Christians suffer together. And when they suffer together, they're united. I like to use this homey kind of illustration. Suppose you've lived in some good-sized city near a person, but you just wave at him when you pass. That's about all you know, and he doesn't know anything much about you. And then one day you're out and you get stuck in the mud on a muddy road, and he gets stuck in the mud on the muddy road. And you know, you just become real good friends after that. Just a little thing like getting stuck in the mud together helps to unite you. Well, I tell you, if getting stuck in the mud together unites you, what about going through one of the worst forms of slavery that the world's ever known? You see how the Jews all over the world today are one? And I realize the Jews as a whole have rejected Christ. They haven't accepted Christ yet. As a whole, one day after Christ comes, they're going to accept Him. They haven't yet. But believe me, I'm pro-Israel, folks. And I'm not pro-Israel just because one day they're all going to be saved in the future. Now, I don't think that's a good ground for favor. I'm pro-Israel because they're anti-communist. And I'm anti-communist too. I think they're a great nation. They're a great nation. But you see, how did they become a great nation? Right at the beginning of their history, God united them by mutual suffering. And in any church, you find me a church where Christians are all suffering. I'll find you one that's pretty well united. You're so busy suffering you don't have time to gossip about somebody else. And that's one of the main ways in which God unites His people. Sometimes you'll find in a family may not be united. And one way God unites that family is by mutual suffering. He lets that family go together through some kind of suffering. And this person doesn't get along with the other one, but he suffers and this one suffers. And that suffering God uses to unite. That's the second way God used this suffering time. Then the third is, it made them willing to leave Egypt. They wouldn't have wanted to leave Egypt if it hadn't been for the suffering. You see, Pharaoh, because of Joseph, had settled them down in a wonderful land. I wonder how many of you remember the name of that part of Egypt where they were settled. Now, Jews lived in other parts of Egypt too. They weren't confined to that. But the main part was, it begins with the letter G, say it for me. The land of Goshen. And that land of Goshen had a wonderful climate. Just about 70 degrees average the year round. Boy, that's good weather. Believe me. And then, if you have a map, and you see the land of Goshen on the map, the whole thing's green. And that means it's very fertile, pasture land. It was just the cream of the crop. Choice crop. The children of Israel would be very happy to spend the rest of their lives there until Pharaoh began to persecute them. And then when persecution came, then they moved on into God's will. I believe that every Christian in his life is going to be guided partly by opposition, partly by persecution. I'll give you my favorite definition of a call to God's service. This doesn't originate with me. Many others have given it, but it's one of my favorites. A call is an open door and a kick from behind. And you'll find it when God is leading His people, often He leads them and I'm calling you to this, but they won't go. And He gives them the kick from behind. And the situation's so tough back here, anything's better than this. And they'll move on. And as I look in my life, I realize I haven't had a great deal of opposition, comparatively speaking. When I read of the great saints of God and the opposition they've had, I hide my face in shame. But I've had some opposition. And the opposition has just been a kick from behind. God moves me on somewhere else. He has something else for me. I don't always know, and I still don't know fully. But suffering leads you and enlarges your vision of the service field that God has for you. So that at least three things God used this bondage in Egypt to do for the children of Israel. He purified them. It's good for a man to bear the yoke in his youth. He united them. Mutual suffering is used to unite people. And the third is made them willing to leave the land of Egypt. Why is the bondage in Egypt such an apt picture of the bondage of sin? For our answer, study carefully the first chapter of Exodus, and keep in mind anything which you know about sin in general. That ought to have been rather easy for you, because it was such a terrible form of bondage. And the terrible form of bondage, Egyptian slavery, is God's picture of the bondage and the slavery of sin. Well, one of the many things that illustrates this is alcohol. When a person's a drunkard. My cousin used to drink some. He said he'd drink at night, but he said the morning after, when I woke up, the last thing I wanted was more liquor. But my brother was the opposite of that. when he drank at night and woke up the next morning, first thing he wanted was more liquor. It was an awful bondage. An awful bondage. You take this whole thing of drugs, young people. Boy, I want to tell you, I think it's a big part of the crime comes to that. I think one thing is people know that if they've been smoking marijuana, and then if they break in, they're not going to get the full blame for that. The authorities are going to blame marijuana for part of that. I think that's one way it works. And then another way, they're just not themselves when they drink liquor and all. You know, I'm still scared of a drunk man. He's just not in possession of himself. You can call that cowardice if you want to, but I want to tell you, I'm still scared of a drunk man. And how many of you are still scared of a drunk man? Are you scared of one? How many of you are not scared of a drunk man? If you aren't, I didn't see any hands raised, so I can speak personally. It may mean that you have drunk a good deal yourself. Because I find that usually those who drink with people aren't afraid of those who are drunk. Have you ever noticed that? I think that's true. Any of you who had a past experience with alcohol can tell me about that later. All right. Whatever I was saying, I don't know, but here it is. Why is the bondage in Egypt such an apt picture of the bondage sin? Because it's such a terrible form of bondage. In the Old Testament, God uses Egyptian slavery as his picture of the slavery of sin. And in the New Testament, God uses Roman slavery as his picture of the slavery of sin. If you were to ask the average historian to name two of the worst forms of slavery the world's ever known, I think you'd find the average historian would say Egyptian slavery in Old Testament times and Roman slavery in New Testament times. Now, in Roman slavery, they did all sorts of terrible things. Of course, crucifixion was one of the worst things. And the Emperor Augustus found one of his slaves who ate the emperor's favorite quail. And Augustus crucified him, put him on a cross and crucified him because of it. One of the simplest things they did was to cut out people's tongues. That's one of the simplest things. That's Roman slavery. Now, one way the Egyptian slavery showed itself was through the work of the Egyptian taskmasters, slave masters. Here's where archaeology comes in. You know, an archaeologist digs down into the earth and finds the remains of previous civilizations. And the archaeologists have unearthed remains showing how brutal were these Egyptian slave masters. They had whips which were made not of leather, but of tough, bending wood. And they applied those whips of tough, bending wood unmercifully to the backs of the victims. And then in addition to that, they made their slaves do terrible amounts of work. See, that's where the pyramids in Egypt were built. Now, you have different pyramids built around over the land of Egypt, but the most famous is located in what city? That city in Egypt has been very famous on television in recent days. What is that city? In Cairo, Egypt. See, they're just out from Cairo. I was there with my dad in 1934. We rode camels around the pyramids and the Sphinx and had pictures. I've got to find my pictures someday. I'll have to show you what a wonderful rider of a camel I am. The only way I say is ride the camel when you're going uphill, it's all right, but when you go downhill, he'll tear you to pieces. That's all I know about riding a camel. And the pyramids, the main one is the pyramids of King Cheops, Cheops. And he had 100,000 slaves. Worked 30 years in building that. It was his burial place. See, they had the idea that in the future life they were going to live pretty much the way they were buried. So they buried those kings with all sorts of jewels and raiment and everything under the sun. And we had a man who came. Boy, they know Americans. They think Americans have a lot of money. And one man said, if you will give me a certain number of piastres, that was the Egyptian currency, I'll run up and down this pyramid. It's 495 feet high. in 7 minutes. Well, we tried to get out of it. We didn't want to see him do it. I didn't think there was too much to it anyway. He went up and down 6.5 minutes. I think my timepiece was a little bit different from his, but we gave him some piastres and we gave him the benefit of the doubt. And I thought, well, he went up and down in less than 7 minutes. Maybe I can get up in 30 minutes. And I started, but I came down with a bang. I don't know how many of you have this. I have an inward urge to jump from a high place. I'm so glad I have another urge not to jump. See? Have you ever been in New York City? How many of you have ever been in New York? You ever been to Radio City? 65 stories high? I was up there.